Hello, and if you weren't in church last week or you haven't seen Sarah's sermon on Facebook, then this might come as a bit of a shock to you, but we're going to be looking at the book of Job over the coming weeks. And the book of Job doesn't feature in the lectionary at all, so we haven't looked at it much at all, I think, at this church. So we need to make an effort if we learn from Job, and we might as well do this together during this common time. It would help, of course, to have the reading, wouldn't it? So here comes the reading from Job. One day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the eldest brother's house, a message came to Job and said the oxen were ploughing and the donkeys were feeding beside them, and the Sabeans fell on them and carried them off and killed the servants with the edge of the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another came and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, yet another came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 columns, made a raid on the camels and carried them off, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another came and said, I alone have escaped to tell you that while your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house, then suddenly a great wind came across the desert, struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are all dead. I alone have escaped to tell you. Now one day the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came from among them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, from going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it. The Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There's no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. He still persists on his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him for no reason. Then Satan answered the Lord, skin for skin. All that people have they will give to save their lives. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well, he is in your power, only spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and inflicted loathsome sores on Job from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So, have you ever considered God's servant Job? I'll be honest, and I'll tell you that I tried a few years ago. I found a book called Mr and Mrs Job, and I made a start on my own. But at that time I failed to reach the end. So let's try and do this together. But as Sarah said in her sermon the previous week, the preaching team over the coming weeks will share this ministry with you of looking at Job. That's myself, Sarah, Sally and Angie. And I expect each of us will have our own perspectives, hopefully, and our own preaching styles, no doubt, on this story as it unfolds. But for now, have you ever considered God's servant Job? There was once a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. The book of Job is classified as wisdom teaching, like Proverbs or Ecclesiastes. It's a book to make you think rather than a factual record. You could even consider it, I suppose, as a rather large parable if it helps. Like, there was once a man travelling from Jerusalem to Jericho, or there was once a man who left all he had. The subject, though, in this case Job, is a representation of ourselves. But the idea is to make you think, how would I react? How do I react? What does it mean? There was once a man in the land of Uz. Uz is fuzzy. I just had to say that. Let's say it once more. Uz is fuzzy. Scholars think, though, that Uz was outside Israel. as Job's described at the beginning of the book as the greatest of all the people of the East. So Job's probably not even to be considered a true, pure Jew, which is an interesting teaching point, I suppose, if the story is directed at Jews. Despite that, he was blameless and upright. He feared God and he turned away from evil. He was apparently squeaky clean. And the suggestion is that as a result, he prospered. And as you weren't here last week, it was 7 sons, 3 daughters, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 1,000 oxen, 500 donkeys, and very many uncountable servants. Job did the right thing and prayed, and he offered sacrifice on behalf of his children. This is what Job always did. Job was upright and stayed away from evil. So that's our starting point on the ground again. And in last week's reading, we then moved to a starting point in heaven, much like we heard just now, where the Satan, the adversary, slight change there, of course, the Satan, he is known as the adversary. He rocks up in some kind of holy meeting, having gone to and fro on the earth and walking up and down on it, and God challenges him by asking him, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And Satan responds with something like, "What's the point? You put a fence around him and all he has, you've blessed him. But tell you what, you make his life difficult and he'll curse you to your face." Notice that Satan acknowledges that Job is in God's protection and that he can do nothing whilst Job is in that protection. So God lets Satan into Job's life. Very well. All that he has is in your power. Only do nothing actually against him. And that was the cliffhanger where we left it last Sunday. And now, from today's reading, we find that Satan does indeed, in that first wave, not touch Job, but takes away all that he's been blessed with. His oxen and his donkeys are stolen. His sheep are incinerated by lightning. The camels too are stolen. And finally, all his sons and daughters are killed. On top of that, he appears to be left with 3 servants. Oh, and his wife, as you're going to find out later. But what's interesting here is that all of these disasters to Job are, to a certain extent, not to be unexpected. Job lives in the East and has nasty neighbours who may well have raided his livestock from time to time, who may well have killed the odd servant here and there. But it is the severity of it all that is the debilitating thing. And we'll remember that Jesus too was not impartial to the odd exaggeration in his teaching and storytelling too, to get a message across. Even the sirocco wind of the desert could really be a killer. It's just that such a disaster that they were all gathered there together when it struck, and that all this happens on the one day. Many of you will know our daughter Hazel and the struggles she has with her mental health. But again, it's things, isn't it, that are not ours personally that affect us, just as Job is affected by things that are not actually against him personally. And the wisdom of how we deal with these disasters in our own lives is what this wisdom teaches, is asking us to ponder. I don't think it's ever going to give us an answer, but it is asking us to ponder these things. I've deliberately left out of today's reading, partly because Tara told me to, because it's part of the reading for next week, really. But perhaps we should take a look through to next week ready. It's verses 20 and 21 of that first chapter. Happens sort of in the middle of that first set of disasters and then moving back into heaven. And it says, "Then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshipped. He said, 'Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.'" It's okay that Job arose. It's okay that he tore his robe. It's very theatrical, very traditional. It's okay that he shaved his head and that he fell on the ground. But he fell on the ground and worshipped, and he said, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." I'll have to admit that during Hazel's really bad days and weeks and months, I can myself go into a kind of meltdown. I'm not sure that "blessed be the name of the Lord" is the first or even the last thing on my tongue at those times. But occasionally that little voice does get through, and look, you yourself are unharmed. Use it to find the strength to go on. Imagine that for Job, because that's what we're being asked to do, is to follow what happens with Job. Because Job doesn't know about this convocation in heaven or anything like that. These things are just happening to him. But likewise, imagine Job, but imagine the frustration of the Satan having to go back up to heaven and go, "It's not worked, to find out that all he has done so far has not swayed Job into cursing God. We need to remind ourselves, as I said, that this is wisdom teaching. And so we can easily switch between that heaven and that earth. But as I say, if we're learned to learn from Job, then we need to be able to see what is happening through his eyes. Job, we'll find out as we go through the reading, considers himself blameless, partly because the writer makes him so at the beginning, and that he's the model of all God-fearing people of his day. He can't do anything wrong, apparently, but bad things happen to him. He prospers through his godliness. Look at that list at the beginning of the reading. And he has absolutely no idea why his life is falling apart. But he's at this point also so realistic that everything is in God's hands, that God can give and God can take away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So yeah, imagine the frustration of the Satan to find that all he's done has not swayed Job into cursing God. So he has to go back and he says, look, it's not really worked, has it? So we continue our reading to that next holy meeting. And this time God allows the Satan, that adversary, the opposite, to hurt Job, but not to kill him. Again, that's going to be interesting in the coming weeks as we consider what Job suffers and whether death would have been kinder for him. But God allows the Satan, the adversary, to hurt Job but not to kill him. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and inflicted loathsome sores on Job from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And at that cliffhanger, we again leave the story for Sally to continue next week. How will Job react this time? Will this be the final straw for Job? Will he finally curse God? Find out in next week's thrilling instalment. So in this story of Job then, to summarise, who lives in the land of the east, the raids on his livestock are to be expected, the lightning's to be expected, even the sirocco wind is a fact of life living in the east. And as big as the storyteller makes Job at that beginning with all that ownership, the greatest man of the east, at the beginning, the bigger are the disasters that befall him. When life falls apart, how do we react? Whose fault is it, if there is even fault? Do we first blame ourselves? Do we blame God as the adversary expects Job to do? Do we turn from God? Or do we in fact turn to God at those times? Do we agree with Job that naked we come in and naked we'll go out? I'm sure you're aware that Psalm 23 verse 4 reminds us that we will walk through the valley of the shadow of death, but that God is with us at those times. When life falls apart, how do we react? A prayer of Henri Nouwen to close. Dear Lord, I will remain restless, tense, and dissatisfied until I can be totally at peace in your house. There's no certainty that my life will be any easier in the years ahead, or that my heart will be any calmer. But there is the certainty that you are waiting for me and will welcome me home when I have persevered in my long journey to your house. Amen.